What's going on, everyone? This is Fred, findmyvapes.com, and today I'm going to show you how to build your own OKR box mod. The OKR is one powerful device. This tiny chip allows you to adjust the voltage between 3.4 and 6 volts. Best of all, it's relatively inexpensive to build. And in this video, I'm going to show you just how to do that. So OKR box mods have been very popular as of late, and it's easy to see why. It delivers a lot of power and has amazing battery life. Now the cool thing about an OKR mod is that it's relatively inexpensive to build, and I'm going to show you how. So if you're interested in making this exact same OKR box mod that I show you in this video, I am making complete DIY kits available to you, and you can get it at shop.findmyvapes.com. Now I am going to show you step by step on how to put this together. Now there is a lot of steps, so just be patient, follow the instructions, and have fun with it. But let's not waste any more time, let's get right to it. Alright, so here's everything that you need to build your own OKR box mod. I will go over every item one by one and also place some links down below so that you can get started on your project. The first item that you'll need is an OKR-T10 chip. Now this is what's going to power your device and allow you to regulate and adjust the voltage of your box mod. Next up is the enclosure. This is a Hammond's 1590G enclosure. It's an aluminum case and everything will fit nicely inside. Our box mod will be powered by two 18650 batteries. So you're going to want to pick up one of these battery sleds. This is just a Keystone dual 18650 battery sled. We will need a 510 connector to screw on our atomizer. So in this project I'm just using a standard silver 510 connector. You will need a firing switch to activate your atomizer. You could pretty much use any switch that you like, but I'm choosing to go with this nice stainless steel fire switch. To adjust the voltage output, we will need a potentiometer. This is a 200 ohm potentiometer. With safety in mind, we are adding in a master on-off switch. This will give you the peace of mind that your mod will not fire when you don't want it to. We will need a few resistors and diodes for this project. The first one being a 1K ohm resistor. This is going to connect to pins 1 and 3 of the OKR chip. I will explain more later on. Next is a 220 ohm resistor. This will be wired in series with a potentiometer. It will be a good idea for you to pick up a Zener 5.6 volt diode. This will be our under voltage protection and prevent you from draining your batteries too low. And to connect everything together, we're going to need some wire. This is some 20 gauge stranded copper wire. To hold our lid to the enclosure, we're going to need some magnets. This is some 1/4 inch by 1/8 inch round magnets. And for the exterior of our enclosure, I'm using some spray-on bed liner. This will give us a durable and grippy coating. And to complete this project, you'll need a soldering iron, solder, some flux paste, and some epoxy. This is going to secure some of the parts to the enclosure. Okay, so that's everything that you need, so let's get started. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is sand the enclosure. Now the reason I'm going to sand this is because most of these project boxes come with a slight slant on all the edges. Now you can sand this with a belt sander or even just some sandpaper on a flat surface. Okay, so I'm back and I have sanded the enclosure. Now this step you don't need to do, it's completely optional, but it is a good idea because you want all of your components to line up straight. Now you don't need any special tools or expensive machines. All that I used was this. All this is just some sandpaper taped to a 2x4. And once you get the enclosure the way you want, we can now start laying out the components. Okay, so here's the open enclosure and we have to decide on where we want to place each component. So the first thing I'm going to do is place the battery sled inside the box. Now this battery sled, I want it as far to the right as possible and as far down as possible. So if you're looking at this sled right now, we will need to do some heavy modification, but I'll get to that later. The next thing that we need to do is the 510 connector. Now I want it in the middle right up here. So I'm just going to lay it off to the side for now. And for the switch, I want it on the left side as far up as possible. So it'll be somewhere around there. And for the potentiometer, I want it on the left towards the bottom. And finally, the master on-off switch. I actually want to place this on the inside of the case, towards the left. So now we know the layout of our box mod. We can start drilling out the holes for the 510 connector, the switch, and the potentiometer. Alright, so I have all the holes drilled, and all these parts are just taped inside for right now. Now all I used was some drill bits and a Dremel tool to get the holes to the correct size that I needed. So once you have these holes drilled, we could work on the battery sled. Okay, so there's two versions of these battery sleds. There's this one, which is the 1048, and you can tell it's the 1048 by the goldish contacts. Now they also have these tabs on each contact that we will need to cut. And the other version is the 1049. Now these have silver contacts and smaller tabs on the bottom. So both of these sleds will work just fine. The version that you get will be dependent on what's available. Now these sleds are in high demand, so they tend to go out of stock. So the version that you get will be determined by what's in stock. Now for the purpose of this video, I'm going to use this one, the 1048. Okay, so here's the inside of the enclosure. Like I mentioned, I just have these pieces just taped in place for right now. Now we want the battery sled to be as far down as possible and as far to the right as possible. So there's a few things that we're going to need to modify. So the first part is that we're going to need to cut off these tabs right here. So we're just going to take a screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, pop these tabs off and snip off these ends. The next obstacle that we have is this screw post right here. So since we want this as far to the right as possible, that screw post is going to come in contact with this sled. So what we have to do is just round off this corner right here, and I'm just going to use a Dremel to round that off. So depending on your placement of the switch, this corner of the battery sled may come in contact with that switch. So if it does, just go ahead and round off this corner as well. Now on the back of the sled, you'll see these little bumps right here. Now we're going to go ahead and sand those flat. So again, we're going to remove these contacts, cut off these tabs right here. I'm going to round off this bottom right corner so that it fits in the box. And if need be, I'm going to round off the top left corner so that it doesn't come in contact with the switch. And to remove these contacts, all you need is just a flathead screwdriver, place it underneath the contact, and push up. Okay, so another thing that we want to do besides cutting off that bottom tab is if you look at this piece right here, it's going straight up and down. That's what contacts your battery. Now that piece right there has a tendency to catch on the wrapping of your battery. So to prevent that from happening, what we're going to do is actually bend it inwards, like that. Alright, so I have the battery sled fitted into this enclosure. Everything fits nice and snug. So what I did here was round off this bottom right corner so that it fits over this screw post right here. And I also rounded off this top left corner just to give me a little extra room for the switch. Now like I said, everything fits nice and snug. I did end up sanding a little bit off this side, this left side right here, just so I could fit this switch in. But other than that, everything is looking pretty good. Really the only thing left to do is wire everything up. Okay, so I have all the parts out of the enclosure and laid out on this table. I have the battery sled, I have the OKR chip, the 510 connector, the fire switch, the master on-off switch, and the potentiometer. Now in efforts to make this wiring as easy to follow and as easy to understand, I'm going to do this in two parts. Meaning I'm going to wire each part individually with their own wires. Then once I place them back in the box, I'm going to connect the corresponding wires together. And to do that, I have a bunch of wires right here. Now I've cut each one of these wires to about 2 inches, and I have tinned the ends of each wire. And basically what tinning means is that you are pre-soldering the wire prior to connecting it to any components. So the way you want to do that is first strip the wire, apply some flux, load up your soldering iron, and then apply the solder to the wire. So I want to give you a quick look at the wiring diagram that I drew. Don't worry about pausing this video or taking a screenshot. I will provide a link to this image down below. Okay, let's take a look at the OKR chip. Now there's 5 pins on this chip, and they're numbered from right to left. Pin number 1 is our remote pin. Basically, this is going to allow us to use any firing switch that we want. Pin number 2 is our power pin. This is going to connect directly to the positive contact of our battery sled. Pin number 3 is our ground. Now we're going to ground this out to our 510 connector. Pin number 4 is our power output. This will be connected to the positive pin of our 510 connector. And finally, pin number 5. This is going to be connected to our potentiometer. This is what's going to allow us to adjust our voltage. Alright, so that's the 5 pins. Let's start wiring it up. Okay, so if you look at the wiring diagram, you're going to see that there's a 1K ohm resistor connecting pins 1 and 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bend the legs of this 1K ohm resistor so that it follows the pins, and then I'm going to solder that on. What you want to do first is apply some flux to the pin and then just lightly solder this resistor to those pins. Okay, so as you can see, I've soldered that 1K ohm resistor to pins 1 and 3. Now I like to leave these legs a little bit long until all the wiring is done. Next thing that we need to solder to pin 1 is the Zener Diode. This is our undervoltage protection. Now make sure that this line is facing down, away from the board. Now I like to just cut off a part of this leg, then go ahead and solder this to pin 1. Okay, so I got the diode soldered onto pin 1. So next I'm just going to snip off this leg from the 1K ohm resistor. For now, let's move on to pin number 2. Now pin number 2 is just a solid red wire that connects to the positive side of our battery sled. So go ahead and solder a red wire to this pin. Next, solder a black ground wire to pin 3. Okay, and you could cut off the leg from the 1K ohm resistor and move on to pin 4. Now pin 4, once again, is just a solid red wire. So now we have pin number 5 left. Now again, if you look at the wiring diagram, we need to connect a 220 ohm resistor. So connect the resistor the same way that you did with the diode. So now we have all the pins wired up, but we're not done yet. What you want to do is make sure that none of the connections are touching each other. Then you want to apply some heat shrink tubing to all the pins. Okay, so I have the heat shrinks installed. Now what I like to do with the diode and resistor is bend them both up and then back down. And I'll show you what I mean. Like this. So you can see that I've bent them up and then put the legs back down. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because we need to connect the 2 red wires to the diode and the resistor. Alright, so we have the OKR chip fully wired now, and it has the 5 wires on the bottom. Now these 5 wires represent the 5 pins that we went over earlier. So what I like to do is actually protect the entire chip by heat shrinking it. So it looks something like this. Now this will ensure that none of the contacts on the board itself will short out on our enclosure. Okay, so now that we're done with the OKR chip, we can move on to the battery sled. Now the OKR chip requires you to wire your batteries in series. So what this is going to look like is that the negative side of your battery is going to be on top for the left slot. And the positive side of your battery will be on top for the right slot. And then we're going to have a jumper cable going from both bottom contacts. So in other words, this is like stacked batteries. So it's going to be negative, positive, negative, positive. So what you want to do is take a small piece of wire and solder them to the bottom contacts. Now before you do that, you want to remove the contacts from the housing because you don't want the soldering iron to melt the battery sled. So it should look something like this. So for the top contacts, we have the negative here and the positive on this side. So according to our wiring diagram, we're going to have 2 black wires on the negative, 2 red wires on the positive. So do the same thing, remove the contacts and solder the wires. And I like to twist the 2 wires together before soldering. This is to ensure that they don't separate. Okay, so this is what it'll look like once that step is done. Now what I did was place some heat shrink on the wires. Now you don't have to do that, but I just think it gives it a cleaner look. So now the battery sled is all wired up, we could place this off to the side. Okay, so here's the potentiometer. And now I know this is going to be kind of hard to see, but this is the front, the face of the potentiometer. Now if we turn it around to the back, where the pins are on the bottom, now if you look at the wiring diagram, we're going to take the middle pin, bend it over to the right pin, and then connect those together. And then we're also going to connect a black negative wire to that right outer pin. and that's going to connect to the negative side of our battery sled. And on the outer left pin, we're going to connect a red positive wire to it. That's actually going to connect to pin 5 of our OKR chip. Okay, can you see that I bent the middle pin over to the right so that it's touching the right outer pin? What I like to do is I like to trim the legs on the potentiometer, and this just gives us a little more room to work with when we're actually placing it inside the case. So go ahead and solder your red and black wires. Okay, so the potentiometer is now fully wired up, and as you can see, I applied some more heat shrink, and I also bent the wires up because I know that that's the direction that these wires will be going. So let's go ahead and move on to the master on and off switch. Okay, so here's the master on and off switch, and it's a sliding switch, so you can move it to the left and right. Now the way that this works is that whatever side that you have it pushed to, it's going to activate that corresponding pin as well as the middle pin. So if you press it all the way to the left, it's going to be the left and middle. If you press it all the way to the right, it's going to be the right and middle. So what we want to do is just pick one of the sides, doesn't matter which one, and we want to connect our red wires to the middle pin as well as one of the outer pins. And before soldering the wires, I'm going to trim off some of these legs. Okay, and again I applied heat shrink, and I am directing the wires in the direction that they're supposed to go inside the enclosure. So the last piece to this is the 510 connector. Now this is just your standard 510 connector. So the middle pin is our positive and the outside housing is our negative or our ground. Now what you want to do is connect our red wire to the middle pin and 2 black wires to the outside housing. Now the positive pin can be pushed out to make soldering a little bit easier. So this is what it should look like once you have everything put back together. So you have your 2 negatives and your positive. So this will conclude the first part of our wiring. We could put all of these parts off to the side because we're going to take a look at the enclosure now. Alright, so here's the same enclosure that I showed you earlier. The only difference is that I painted it with some spray-on bed liner. Now you don't have to use bed liner. You can powder coat this, anodize it, or even just paint it. But I like to go with bed liner because it gives you a very durable finish and it provides a lot of grip. Now this enclosure comes with 2 parts. You have the actual box and the lid. Now the way that we're going to secure the lid to the box is with magnets. And these are the magnets that we're using. They're a 1/4 inch by an 1/8 inch round magnets. Since magnets do not stick to the aluminum enclosure, we need to install the screws that were provided with the case. But if you notice, when we install the screws, they don't sit flush with the case. So this is going to be a problem because when we put our lid on it, it's going to prevent it from sitting flush. So we need to find some way to countersink these screws. And the way we're going to do it is with a 1/4 inch drill bit. So what you need is either a drill press or even a hand drill. And take the 1/4 inch drill bit and slowly and carefully drill away that hole. That's going to countersink this screw hole, allowing the screw head to sit flush with the case. And we're going to do the same thing with the lid. So take your 1/4 inch drill bit and slowly take down each screw hole. This is going to allow us to mount the magnets flush with the lid. And this is what it's going to look like after you drill out the holes. So all of these screws are now mounted flush. They're flush with the sides of the case. And that's what you're looking for. So this is what the lid looks like after you countersink all the screw holes. Now I didn't drill the whole thing out. It didn't go all the way through. I just countersunk it slightly so that the magnets will sit flush. So I'm going to put in the magnets. So here's the case. And when you put the lid over it, it just snaps in nice and tight. It's a nice solid fit, and there's no way that this is going to fall off. And to epoxy it, you just want to put a very, very small dab of epoxy inside the holes and then insert the magnets. So now is a good time for you to epoxy the 510 connector inside the enclosure as well as the potentiometer. Alright, so I got a few parts installed on the enclosure right now. I have the potentiometer right here, The switch is just screwed on, it's not epoxied, and I have the 510 connector. So there's a few things that you need to know about epoxying the potentiometer. You definitely do not want to get any epoxy onto the potentiometer itself. That's going to seize up the thumb wheel and basically ruin your potentiometer. You're going to have to get a new one if you do that. So what I like to do is cover the entire potentiometer that's inside the enclosure with electrical tape. Then apply the epoxy onto the tape. This is going to prevent any of the epoxy seeping down into the actual potentiometer. So at this point, we're ready to do the final wiring. And this is going to be the most difficult part when building your OKR box mod. The reason being is because it's going to be a really tight fit. So if I put this battery sled temporarily inside the enclosure, you're going to see that there's not a whole lot of room to do your wiring. So I'm going to try to get as much of the wiring on film as I can. What you really want to do at this point is study the wiring diagram and then just go for it. You're kind of on your own at this point. So what I like to do is work on the part that's furthest away from the chip. Now the chip is going to be placed up here next to the 510 connector. So in this case, I'm going to start with the potentiometer. Okay, so I have the potentiometer fully wired up. The red wire connects to pin 5 on the OKR chip. Now the black wire on the potentiometer connects to the negative terminal on the battery sled. And then I have all the wires routed down in the slot right here and going underneath this switch. Next up, I'm going to work on the master on-off switch. So one of the red wires connects to the firing switch, and the other red wire connects to the positive terminal of the battery sled. So I just finished up the master switch, and this is connected to one of the pins on the firing switch, as well as one of the positive contacts on the battery sled. So next up is to complete the firing switch. So we need to connect this to pin 1 of our OKR chip. Okay, so we're pretty close. So all we have next is the negative for our 510 connector, which for me is right here. We have the second pin of the OKR chip, and this goes directly to the battery's positive contact. We have the third pin, which is the ground, and this will connect to the second wire that we had grounded on the 510 connector, which for me is right here. And finally, we have the power output. This is pin number 4 on the chip, and this will connect directly to the positive pin of our 510 connector. Alright, so I finished up the wiring, and this is pretty much done. As you can see, this is firing nicely. Oh yeah. Now I did put some hot glue on the master switch and some hot glue on the battery sled. So as you can see, if I turn the switch off, it doesn't fire. But if I turn it on, there it goes. So all that's left to do is vape on it. So this OKR box mod has quickly become my favorite vape. It delivers a lot of power, and I mean a lot. You can adjust it from 3.4 volts all the way up to 6 volts. Now I don't even get close to reaching its max power. It is powered by two 18650 batteries, has an on and off switch, and it has under voltage protection, which will prevent you from damaging your batteries. So I gotta say, this is one hell of a box mod, and you can build one too. Now there are a few footnotes and recommendations that I want to give to you. Number 1, wiring. There are several ways to wire an OKR chip. The way that I showed you in this video is just what I personally feel is the easiest and provides the most options. It allows you to pretty much use any switch that you want, has the on and off switch, and the under voltage protection. Those are options that are not even available on many retail OKR box mods. But feel free to experiment with any wiring diagram that you feel comfortable with. Number 2, batteries. Now the OKR box mod requires two 18650 batteries wired in series. Now it's recommended to go with high amperage batteries, but more importantly you have to remember to put your negative side up on the left slot and the positive side up on the right. If you put it in backwards, you do risk damaging the OKR chip. So it's very, very important to put them in correctly. Number 3, 510 connector. Now I wanted to make this project as simple as possible, so I decided to go with a standard silver 510 connector. Now if you have an atomizer with a long positive pin, you may end up with a small gap in between the box and the atomizer. For me, it doesn't bother me, but if it bothers you, you can always upgrade to a 510 connector with an adjustable pin. Number 4, resistance. When building your atomizer, you want to keep the resistance above 0.5 ohms. If you consistently go below that, you are in danger of burning out the OKR chip. Now remember guys, you have 50 watts to work with. You don't need to go super sub-ohm. And finally, number 5, parts. I wish that I could tell you that these parts are readily available and always in stock. But the truth is, they're not. These parts are in high demand and they tend to go out of stock. So if they do go out of stock, you just need to be creative and find another part that's compatible. Like I mentioned earlier, I do have complete DIY kits available on my website, and I'll put a link down below. But overall, this was fairly easy to build, it was a lot of fun to do, and the result is an amazing vape. But that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Alright, we're gonna start wiring, dude. This is gonna be crazy. Are you sick of having the same mod as everyone else? Tired of waiting on pre-orders? Well, maybe you should build your own DNA box mod. It's not as difficult as they may seem.